As the first man in history, he won both the bouldering and lead climbing world championships in a single year. In Flatanger, Norway, he pushed the difficulty limit to an unprecedented 9C, which had not been climbed before. The route Silence. And this year in Prague, he said goodbye to bouldering competitions and is now focusing on lead climbing at the Olympic Games in LA 2028. The phenomenon of sport climbing Adam Ondra is a guest. Hi, Adam.
Hi.
Classic question. A bit of a cliche, but could you climb before you could walk?
Maybe. Apparently, when I was about 9 months old, I climbed out of the crib, says my mom, and somehow made my way into the kitchen.
Cool, that's the type of story you would expect of a future climber. When I listened to an interview on DVTV from about 2 years ago, I feel like Martin Veselovsky was kind of grilling you regarding guiding children towards climbing, like in the sense of how one tries to do that and so on. Let's not pretend that we wouldn't want our children to climb. But what have you actually learned from raising your son Hugo so far?
Regarding climbing? Well, my son Hugo is 3 years and 3 months old, so I think so. And definitely, the environment of climbing gyms, which today have really nice children's areas, I think it must appeal to every child, but it's actually very similar to going to a playground. But it seems to me that the desire to climb somewhere is starting now, and that he enjoys the movement. I feel like it's there, but I think that even if you don't take a child to the climbing gym, you at least take them to the playground, where there are some things to climb on, and probably everyone likes climbing there. And for some basic physical development, it's probably important.
I actually have a lot of people around me, friends, and I also am one of those people who have some history with climbing, but aren't primarily climbers. Yet they would like their children to climb because it's excellent training. It's good from a physiological perspective. The environment of the crags is nice. I'm actually interested if, in your parenting, you've been thinking more about how to encourage your son to climb. If you've perhaps gathered some information from, I don't know, older climbers who have older children and so on.
Well, I've grown up in that environment since I was little. From a young age, I've seen parents and children who simply go climbing together on the crags, and I've seen both rather positive and rather negative cases. For example, I know quite a few people who spent all their free time at the crag, and I think that might have caused some children to lose interest in climbing as adults because they didn't know anything else as kids. So my wife Eva and I are trying to make sure that Hugo knows other things besides climbing, you know. But I think that if the child has it in them and has role models, like parents climbing or friends climbing, then it will come eventually. And, well, I want to give it a try, you know. But I think that pressure of any kind or anything like that never ever leads to anything good. And even if later, when they're older, some kind of mild pressure might lead to good results, maybe even, I don't know, all the way to a world championship or something like that. If it's not coming from within, if it's not the person's own drive and enjoyment, then not even a world championship medal is a sufficient reason to do it if the person doesn't enjoy it, you know. But I don't think it's even possible to achieve such levels of success. For instance, when I was a kid, I saw several cases of kids being pressured in some way, and already back then I was wondering, why are they climbing if they don't even enjoy it? I never had this kind of problem. It was the other way around. My parents probably had to hold me back a little.
That's what I want to ask, actually. What was it like for you as a child? Did it come naturally from within, and your parents just nurtured it a little?
Well, until I was about 6, we were kind of a really active family because of the 3 sports we did: skiing, cycling, and climbing. And I'd say it was pretty balanced. None of them really dominated. Before I was born, my parents were mainly climbers, but once I came along, we kind of did all 3 sports together. Then, around the age of 6 or 7, I entered a new phase, I went to my very first climbing competition. I also started trying some of the routes my parents were already climbing, and I absolutely loved it. All I wanted was to climb. Nothing else mattered to me. So we put the bikes aside, and for a while we still did some skiing in winter. But by the time I was 9 or 10, when we discovered that you could climb in Spain or Italy during the winter, we pretty much stopped skiing too. Interestingly, I expected that once I became independent, my parents would start cycling and skiing again. But no, they just go climbing.
When did you start having structured training? I mean climbing training. Like, even if we talk about those first competitions, which I understand were around when you were 6 or 7, at that time, were you just casually climbing, just going climbing for fun? Or did it already include elements of systematic training back then?
Besides climbing, I did gymnastics maybe twice a week until I was 12 years old. From the start, they told me that I would be too tall and that they didn't want me, but we stuck with it for a little while. Obviously, given the height of my parents, it was clear to them that I wasn't a promising candidate for competitive gymnastics.
Are your parents tall?
Yeah. Not like super tall or anything. Neither am I. My dad is just about as tall as I am. Mom is a bit shorter, you know. But my training until maybe, I don't know, 16, 17 years old was basically just climbing. I climbed a lot. Maybe around 14 or 15 I started thinking, like, okay, there's a competition coming up, so maybe I'll train a bit less so I can be rested for it. But basically, apart from climbing itself, there was no other training at all, which I think was great in a way, because I actually climbed really well thanks to that. For many years, I was able to do pretty hard routes without actually being that strong. So with minimal strength, I still managed to get through some really tough, even power-oriented sections, which basically forced me to figure out all sorts of different technical tricks and little hacks that I still benefit from a lot today.
How do you explain that you were able to get away with that, so to speak? That you were able to send difficult routes without that, like without the strength?
I believe that we all have some kind of talent. We have some talent for it, or just genetic predispositions, call it whatever you want. Like, some people just naturally gain strength easily. And I think my real talent lies in understanding movement, being able to learn in different situations. Climbing is special in that way, because it's extremely complex. Every single move is a little bit different, and in each situation, something a bit different works. And I guess I also have some kind of special strengths that I can make use of in certain situations. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think in extreme climbing, it's really important to find a kind of flow, or just the right pacing, you know? Like, when the next 3 moves are hard, it's best to do them as quickly as possible, but not in a way that I tense up too much. And then, if the next 2 moves are easier, it's better to shake out for, say, a second and a half. But deciding based on my body whether it's 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds, that's absolutely crucial. If you consciously practice this from the beginning of your climbing, and I was crazy into climbing from the age of 7 and thought about all this a lot.
Yeah? Did you actually put not only the movement into it, but also the mind?
Yeah. I've always just been really into climbing a certain route. Well, I was just thinking about what I should do differently. And my parents were there, but I really didn't like it when they interfered, you know? And like, as a kid, I think I was really weird in this way, you know? Maybe the viewers find it strange, like a 7-year-old kid. What could he possibly have thought about? But well, it was like that, yeah.
You mentioned the word talent. Actually, I think that's a good topic or a good question that I want to ask. Because when you have a professional athlete, someone who can do something big, the public often tends to attribute their skill or success to talent. But where was the turning point for you? Because talent does not have to be decisive, right? So, when did you start with some training that gave you an advantage over other talented opponents? A head start over your friends, opponents perhaps.
I think it's really important to stress that just climbing got me pretty far. Like, I don't know. I even made it to second place at the World Championships when I was 16.
Yeah?
But this was because, for example, the routes were set in a way that did not make my physical weaknesses show that much. Which, for example, if I went to the comps with that level now, I wouldn't stand a chance. They just used to be set differently.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my body looked different. I was the same height, but about 15 kilos lighter. Which, however, wasn't sustainable, or simply put. The genetics I got from my dad is such that until 20 we were skinny, but then we gained muscle mass. Which I would tell the viewers I'm kind of tall compared to the other climbers, and actually quite muscular and heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. But even...
Anyway, I think that a person has talents for various things, and this can be a talent for learning technique, a talent for understanding, a talent for having strength. Some people can do a one-arm pull-up without training, while others never do one in their whole life. And then there's something about how much you enjoy it, and then some hard work and determination. And I think that in climbing, there are things I have extreme talent for, and others I don't. But then there's the passion and hard work, which are at the top of the list.
So when did that systematic training become part of your climbing?
I'd say around the age of 16, but I still didn't have a coach then. I only got a coach when I was about 19 or 20. And I think what helped me the most was fine-tuning the training for competitions, making sure I was in peak form exactly on the day I needed to be, which I didn't really have when I was just training on my own. And if there's something I kind of regret, though it was simply a different time, it's that I didn't focus more on physiotherapy and strengthening my weak points. To some extent, it was also because I didn't really feel those weaknesses that much, whether on the crag or especially in competitions, back when the routes were set differently. When the more modern style came in, that's when I really started to feel those weaknesses. But I think if I had worked on physiotherapy from childhood, I might have been even healthier when it comes to injuries. I was pretty lucky anyway, but I believe that was more about luck than anything I actively did. I think my luck was that in climbing, I always focused a lot on efficiency. And in climbing, when you do most things with extreme efficiency, the movement itself is usually healthy too. There are some exceptions, of course, such as learning to heel hook really hard and putting all your weight on one foot. That way you get as close to the wall as possible. Of course, your knees can really suffer from that. So I guess I've been lucky with mine. But today, it's a completely different story. Physiotherapists are now simply part of competitive climbing teams. And if, for example, I was as crooked as a bonsai just a few years ago, that's no longer the case. But for sure, if someone had seen me when I was a kid, they would have picked up on it right away. And that would have been a good thing. Maybe then my shoulders wouldn't suffer as much today. They're really my Achilles' heel.
After all these years and being over 30, do you feel that things are starting to change in your training?
A little, but usually what wears out the most for climbers traditionally are the fingers, and those are still good.
So we've talked about your strengths in climbing, certain gifts and talents. But when people hear the name Adam Ondra, from a climber's perspective, what would you say is your super skill, if you can call it that? For example, within the community or...
So maybe now I'll split it into two parts. What I'm most proud of is that I'm not just a good competition climber, or a good sport climber, but that I can basically climb on almost anything, whether it's a 1-meter boulder or a 1,000-meter wall. And honestly, there's pretty much no one else in the world with that kind of versatility. These days, if you look at competition climbing, it's so balanced and so competitive that if I were born today and wanted to pursue competition climbing at a high level, I would probably have to give up rock climbing. It just wouldn't be possible anymore.
As in having to specialize?
15 years ago, it was still possible. Today, I think it is not really possible anymore. But for me, it was really important for my mindset and motivation, to occasionally climb something different, something more adventurous. Because my background is such that, yes, I did start on an artificial wall, or maybe here on some sort of rock formations around Brno, but my parents were primarily mountaineers. I mean, when they were young, they went climbing in the Tatra mountains in winter, and some higher mountains as well. They were never really interested in hiking up at least 1,000 meters. They were more into climbing in the mountains. And when I, as a little kid, just listened to all those stories, I found it really fascinating. And to me, climbing has always meant both, the artificial wall and the mountains. The thought that I might never experience the mountains never crossed my mind. I've always been looking forward to it. And even though I've never really done anything purely alpine, I have climbed a few bigger walls, and that really interests me a lot.
Let's delve into that.
And then, like the second area, my kind of superpowers, I think I have flexible hips, which just helps. And I have relatively resilient knees. So in many places, I just make it easier for myself with my heel hooks or high steps. And by really being able to load that high foot and get my center of gravity just a centimeter closer to the wall, it can mean taking 10 kilos off my arms. That way I can rest in places where someone less flexible simply couldn't.
And can such a place determine whether you fall off or not?
Yeah. But again, if we look at the physical side, if competitions were only about physical strength, then even on my best day, in peak Olympic form, I could never win. That's just not possible. I have to rely on climbing better than the others and on them making mistakes. And they almost always make some kind of mistake. The question is just how big it is.
What we haven't mentioned so far are the Onsight climbs. For the viewers, we should say that Onsight means that you simply come to the rock face, you've never seen it, never climbed it, and you just send it on the first try, right? You've done an incredible number of them. I looked it up, and even the climbers right behind you have significantly fewer Onsight ascents. Roughly how many do you have at, let's say, a certain grade that matters to you? I won't name a specific one. But above, I don't know, 9B?
I don't know.
Sorry, 8B.
From grade 8B? Well, I don't even know how many 8Bs. But when it comes to 8Cs, I think maybe only 20 people have actually on-sighted an 8C, and maybe 4 people have on-sighted an 8C+. So I think I have 158 Cs.
Okay. That's where the strong point of some tactics or abilities really comes into play.
Well, it's really like there are two things. For example, on an artificial wall, lead climbing competitions are about climbing on-site. But still, reading a route on an artificial wall is simply easier because
you can see it.
You can see all the holds, and instead of trying to solve it purely intuitively, you try to put yourself in the setter's shoes and figure out what they had in mind. And then sometimes you realize, oh, the setter intended it this way, but I'll do it my way because it's easier. But on the rock, the holds don't just stick out at you. You have to learn to read the rock. And some types of rock are easier to read, some are harder. Sometimes it's chalked up, so you can tell from the chalk marks. Oh, that white spot is probably a hold. That's what you need to reach for. But I have on-sighted many routes of grade 8C where there wasn't even a trace of chalk. And yeah, if there were competitions in this, I think my chances would be great.
Let's go back to mountaineering for a moment. Of course, I am very interested in it because when we talk about climbing, most of the guests on our podcast and the viewers actually know that there is mountaineering as a type of climbing, and you actually mentioned it. So you grew up in an environment where mountaineering was present, and you mentioned the Tatra Mountains, but you yourself we'll get to the dawn wall, right? To big walls. But when it comes to mountaineering in the sense of a 2-day ascent somewhere, I'm not saying straight to the Himalayas, but say the Alps. You've never really touched that, or have you?
No, not really. From a very young age, I knew that just hiking in the mountains wasn't what I enjoyed. What I loved was climbing on the crag. Yeah, and that's how it has been for me to this day. So climbing on ice with ice axes and crampons doesn't really appeal to me, because
What do you feel is missing in it?
I guess, even though it's rather a subconscious thing, but when I think about it more, I think the reason is that I just enjoy touching the rock with my bare hands. And if it's like a type of climbing where you don't touch the rock with your bare hands, it kind of feels too monotonous, repetitive to me. Because when you touch the rock with your bare hands, every hold is different. And even the same hold, when you climb the same route for the umpteenth time, you might always grab it a little differently. The ice axe, you just keep holding the same hold. And maybe there's also a bit of spirituality in it. Like when you're making a first ascent in the mountains, touching holds that no one has ever held before. The rock has been there for ages, and there's something really special about that.
Look, and
I don't really want to make a big deal out of it, but yeah, it is kind of interesting.
could this also be a bit about you seeing the ice axe and, I don't know, crampons as something that separates you?
Yeah, definitely.
From the rock?
I just feel like I have a closer connection with the rock, with the crag itself, really.
And do you actually follow the scene in some way? Because right now I'm thinking of something that absolutely fascinates me. One of the first really big wall or high mountain documentaries was Meru. I don't know if you've seen it.
Sure.
It's just something absolutely unbelievable. We'll give the audience a link in the description because it's just like a fascinating documentary where actually Jimmy Chin, the filmmaker who directed Free Solo, if I'm not mistaken, for which he won an Oscar, climbs together with Conrad Anker and Renan Ozturk, who are actually climbers and mountaineers. Just an absolutely unbelievable scene. I mean, Wall. Sorry, have you seen it?
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
Well, great.
That's just like unbelievable, right?
Yeah, this is the kind of mountaineering I really enjoy watching, because the rock still plays a big part in it. I'm not sure if I myself would be tempted to climb Meru. After all, there's still some snow up there. But there are similar mountains in that area that are more purely rock, and those would definitely interest me a lot.
As we gradually move on to the Dawn Wall, the iconic Yosemite route on El Capitan, there it's... And when we compare something like Meru, and this from a safety perspective, is it a factor for you that, besides the ice, that the Dawn Wall will be safer in some respect?
Sure, of course, yeah. Well, the higher the mountain, the more I feel there's a risk that is hard to control. And it's kind of like that risk, which I don't have in my hands. Let's say, I don't know, climbing a difficult route on sandstone, which has little protection. I kind of feel like that's in my own hands and feet. I just have to climb in a way that I don't fall, and at the same time it's still climbable somehow. And also in a way that reduces the chance of breaking a hold, when you know it could mean decking. But still, it's only for a limited time, like on sandstone when you've got the rope. Versus Free Solo, where on a big wall you're exposed for 2 hours straight. Every single second you're exposed to death if you fall. And the higher the mountains, there are just things you can't control. Plus, well, I'm afraid of, for example, glacier crevasses. I've never really experienced it, and I know that, like, to go to some higher mountains, like, climbing has always been about actual climbing for me, about the movement upwards.
And not the approach.
Yeah, and you also need belay. It feels like a necessary evil, you know? Just rope handling and all that. You need it to climb the wall and keep yourself safe, but I don't really enjoy it. So when it comes to big wall climbing, my ability to build an anchor out of cams and nuts is honestly pretty bad. And I know it's something I need to learn. From the perspective of higher mountains, that's definitely one of my big weaknesses.
And is that something that's even in your plans at all?
I'd definitely like to try it someday. But right now, with my family situation, I want to be a father and spend time with them. I'd rather go on a few rock trips than on a single expedition, and then come home with all my family points used up. But actually, I find it hard to objectively assess whether to go to some rock face in the Karakoram and be on an expedition there for 2 months, and not really climb that much. Well, I kind of enjoy climbing all the time, but the situation where you go somewhere to the Karakoram, you just spend 2 weeks first flying, driving, and then walking there, then you are at the base camp, and you are stuck there, waiting for your kind of window. Then, if you're lucky, you get 2 good days of climbing. And then by the time you finally get back home, you're completely out of shape and feel like climbing has never been harder or worse. That's actually a concept that maybe doesn't sound all that appealing.
Sure.
But then again, climbing something like Eternal Flame on the nameless tower in the Karakoram, when you see that rock, you just want to experience it. El Capitan is amazing, of course, but it's not the same.
So, was it the same with that Dawn Wall?
El Capitan is all about rock climbing, you know. It's like the tallest and most compact wall in the world, just 10 minutes from your car. It's just...
I kind of expected you to say artificial climbing wall.
No, like it's...
Sure, it's iconic.
It's monumental, but it's ridiculously easy to get to.
In the end, you climbed it in 8 days. About twice as fast as Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen did before. Did you talk to the guys about it afterwards? Did you break it down together?
Yeah.
So that's probably like...
We had already talked about it before, actually with both Kevin and Tommy. I even ran into them down in the valley while I was working on it.
Did you share with them your idea of the pace? How fast you wanted to climb it?
That's kind of what they expected. I would just say that if Tommy Caldwell were climbing alone, he would probably climb it faster. But it's not really about time records. It's just about climbing it.
Anyway, another movie tip for the viewers. I think it's called The Dawn Wall. It's beautiful, just really well made, perfect for anyone who likes mountain films. Let's go back to training for a moment. How much of your training would you say is some kind of boring drill? The stuff you don't really enjoy, versus the part that you actually find fun?
Well, for me, training also includes things like physio exercises and workouts, and then, of course, the climbing itself. So actually, I don't do campus board that much anymore and do very little fingerboarding. And then there's some form of climbing, whether it's on artificial walls, boulders, or with ropes. So I would say 65%, 70% is climbing, and the rest is something around that. And climbing itself, I just always enjoy it, no matter what it is. The other stuff, some of it I like more, some less. But let's be honest, climbing is always better.
Sure. But things like physiotherapy, do you have to force yourself to do it or not?
I have to force myself to do that the most.
Paradoxically, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, I can see the results. So I know it makes sense. And especially when you start to feel that something hurts, that's when you really push yourself to do it.
Do you have a rest day every week? Do you take a break from climbing?
Definitely. Right now, I actually take Monday and Friday as rest days. And basically, I don't do anything then.
Not even the physiotherapy?
I'm going to physical therapy because some of the physiotherapy exercises are actually quite tiring. And when the training is tough, I usually train in 4-day cycles of 3 weeks of hard training, and the 4th week is for recovery. So actually, I feel like the training kind of drains me, and I need to recharge over the rest day. So the physical activity I do is just going to the playground with Hugo or going for a walk. But really, that's about it.
There were actually two more things I wanted to ask you about. Things I was curious about. One is, do you run or cycle as part of your training?
Not much. At certain times I do. Like before lead climbing competitions, where weight plays more of a role. So I do some form of either cycling or running, so that I reach the weight I want a month before the competition.
Sure, so because of...
It's not really sustainable in the long term, so I just fine-tune it for the competition. But crags are something else. Like, when climbing on the crag, it's not necessary or even good to be as light as for the competitions. The style is a bit different, you know. Simply put, these competitions are set up so that the route is very well balanced, focusing on power endurance. 4 to 5 minutes of exertion, and the lighter you are, the less tired you get. It can also make up for having slightly less climbing with maximum strength. And on rock, it's usually less homogeneous, less about endurance, and more about maximum power. And in that case, having 2 extra kilos actually works better.
The second thing I was curious about is the whole topic of meditation, working with breath, with focus. Because the way I understand it, the tactics you use on a route, if you want to apply them well, require composure. And to have that composure, you first need to be aware of what's going on in your head, to keep track of that somehow. So is working with the mind something you've consciously trained or still work on?
Visualization.
Visualization, okay.
But you know, like when you come to the wall, just imagine. Most of my training is actually on what we call a spray wall. That means a wall that's fully covered with holds. Even that rock wall behind us is kind of like a spray wall. It means there's a huge number of holds in a small space, from tiny ones to massive ones, from holds that are almost impossible to use to big jugs. And basically, you make up the boulder, the route, or the circuit yourself in this sea of holds. Or sometimes you just climb with a friend and they come up with it. You set which holds you're going to use, and even before you get on the wall, you try to visualize how you're going to climb it. But that doesn't mean literally hand, foot, hand here, hand there, hand there. So it's more like this hand here, and then where do you put your foot? You try to automatically visualize what you'll be doing there. Do you place your foot like this, or will you be in external rotation? What's your spine going to be doing? Things like that. How exactly are you going to grab that hold? And when you've been doing this kind of conscious practice for 25 years like I have, every single training day, that's really the best training there is. Visualization.
Okay.
But some people, you just tell them, here are the holds, and they start climbing almost mindlessly. And if people say that 10,000 hours is the minimum to reach mastery, in climbing it's... But I think this also applies to any other activity. It's not only about the number of hours you spend on the wall. It's about whether you are mentally present and focused. For me, it just happens almost subconsciously. So yes, sometimes I just lie down at home and try to visualize a project I'm working on. But it depends. Some projects are extremely complex in terms of movement, so I do it often. Others are less movement intensive, and I don't do it as much. But apart from that, I don't really do formal meditation or anything like that. Relatively often, I'll do yoga nidra, which basically just means lying down and trying to relax as much as possible.
And do you scan through your body?
Yeah. For me, it actually works really well instead of taking a nap between training sessions. And especially in those tense situations before competitions, I feel like this kind of conscious relaxation really helps.
So do you include it even before the competition?
Yeah. For example, if the semifinals are in the morning and the finals are in the evening, that's when I do it.
Do you practice it on your own? Or
Because I usually can't really take a nap. I just won't fall asleep.
you won't fall asleep?
So this is kind of a good compensation, yeah.
Over the years, as you became more widely known and more visible, you must have had the chance to meet quite a few of your former idols or other big climbers. What was that like for you? Because at some point you became outstanding. You started climbing routes that even people a whole generation older hadn't managed. Are there any encounters that stand out for you, moments where you thought, wow, this is amazing that I actually got to meet this person?
Yeah, there are definitely many. Ever since I was a kid, I was really interested in the history of climbing. And today I see it almost as my duty or responsibility to care about climbing and to know as much as I can about it. Yeah, so for example, when I was about 8 years old, I met probably the only person I ever asked for an autograph, Stefan Glowacz. I met him in Arco, in Italy. But actually, my idol ever since I was little was Wolfgang Gulich, who unfortunately had already passed away by the time I started climbing. But in the Franken Jura, there are his routes that I had always wanted to climb since I was a kid. His hardest route is Action Direct, the first 9A in the world, and I ended up climbing it when I was 15.
At 15?
Mm-hmm.
Disappointments are, of course, part of elite-level sport. When I listened to some of your interviews, you spoke quite openly about Tokyo and how you dealt with it. So my question is, what was that experience like for you? Because I can imagine that if it were me, even if I tried to stay above it all and be humble, telling myself, hey, anything can happen in a competition. But deep down, I would still have the expectation that I should at least, in quotation marks, I know it sounds terrible, but at least make it to the podium. Or,
well, yeah.
So what was it actually like, not finishing the way you would ideally have imagined?
Well, both Tokyo and Paris were by far the two biggest disappointments of my life. I guess I was always kind of lucky in my career. Sure, there were setbacks, but for example, I trained really hard for the World Championships in 2011, and it didn't work out. But the World Championships happen every 2 years, so I felt like, okay, 2 years isn't that long to wait. And then, it might work out the next time. But the Olympics only come once every 4 years. And in my case, they actually came later than they should have for me. To some extent, my life would have been a lot easier if the Olympics had never come at all, or if they only came a few years later, when I might already have ended my competition career. So yes, it was nice to have the chance to experience it, but the disappointment was huge. And at the same time, knowing that if it had been my main discipline, lead climbing, I would have had a medal both from Tokyo and from Paris. That makes it hurt even more.
Well, of course, because...
And honestly, I've never trained harder for anything in my life than I did for Tokyo and Paris. I never put more mental energy, physical energy, everything into anything else. I've never sacrificed more. And at the same time, you know that you didn't really make any major mistake, either in training or in the competition itself. It just didn't work out.
At the same time, it's really important to say that there are certain factors which, unless you have a great overall understanding, are almost below the threshold of what you can even notice. But they're still there.
We can come back again to the fact that I have certain weaknesses that I only started working on quite late. I managed to deal with them to some extent, but I never really brought them up from below average even to average. I'm still slightly below average. If I had started working on them at 15, maybe I could have brought them up to average, but... Back then, there were no Olympics, no physiotherapy in climbing, and so on.
And then there's also the whole topic of how, not so much the federation, but basically the way the rules were set up and everything around that. But that's really another topic. Anyway, since we're on the Olympics, LA is in 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And there it will already be separated, with medals awarded individually for bouldering, lead, and speed climbing. 3 years may still sound like a lot, but the preparation starts now. So how do you feel when you look ahead to that future?
Well, the fact that if lead climbing had been a separate discipline in Tokyo and Paris, I probably would have had a medal, doesn't mean I'll have a great chance in LA. I'll already be 35 by then, and I expect the level will rise a lot in the coming years. It's just that the new generation, the ones growing up on amazing indoor walls with great access to training, they're here now. I kind of wanted to give myself time to think it through and just go with the flow, because it's not as simple as, I'll try and see how it goes. At the same time, I also have a lot to lose. Because if I dedicate the next 3 years only to competition climbing, that's time I'll miss on the rock. And then maybe after LA, I may realize that I am already too old for the dreams I still want to achieve on real rock. So the question is, whether at all. Probably yes. But then the question is, how much to fixate on it? There's a big difference between preparing for LA from now until then almost without touching real rock. Or maybe it's better to focus on rock climbing now. Luckily, competition lead climbing and outdoor sport climbing aren't radically different disciplines. They still overlap in many ways. Of course, there are differences. For me, it really depends on how the route is set. Whether it's designed more like on the rock, with a bouldery style, rests and a shorter length, or whether it's pure extreme endurance where you just can't stop. So for now, I see it like this. I'll do some competitions here and there, but primarily I'll focus on the rock. And then maybe in that last season, right before LA, I'll shift my focus more on the specific, on what I'll most likely need in the competition. But even that isn't really clear, because the route-setting style keeps evolving. Especially in bouldering, the way routes are set is changing so rapidly. Every competition feels completely different. Lead climbing is more consistent, but what the average spectator might not really notice is that sometimes a route has 40 moves, and sometimes it has 60. And the way you train for it is just completely different. And let me put it this way. If it's a 40-move route, I can perform well on it even without specific training. But if it's a 60-move route, then I really have to work incredibly hard. And even then, I know that if it's purely about physical endurance, I just won't be able to beat the others. And sometimes a route is more about raw physical endurance, while other times it's more about how well you can actually climb. And the more it comes down to pure climbing ability, the better it is for me. But you never really know what they're going to set in an Olympic final.
In recent years, you've also started to focus more on topics that reach beyond climbing. There was the issue of CO2, then the Miracle of Birth Foundation, where you helped raise funds for the University Hospital in Olomouc, as well as Memory of Nations and so on. When did the impulse come to start using your reach, your face, in a way, for things that don't directly have to do with climbing?
Well, it was more of a transition. Until around 2016, I didn't have any social media at all. Not as an athlete, not even personally. I resisted it for quite a while. Then, at some point, I gave in. And part of the impulse was realizing that social media isn't just a tool for self-presentation, but also a way to have a broader impact. So I think I've found a pretty good balance, being able to focus on my climbing and my family, while still doing things like that from time to time. But I hope that in the future, I'll have even more time for it. On one hand, I know that training 8 hours a day, 7 days a week is something I might even like to do. But at my age, it isn't, and never will be, that effective anymore. So hopefully that will free up more time.
Of course, there are also your own projects that are going really well, like your very successful, widely followed YouTube channel. I was just looking at the numbers, and they're incredible. You obviously have a team of people behind it. My question is, do the people on your team need to be climbers?
Not really.
Not really? Okay.
Like everyone has at least tried.
Yeah.
But not everyone climbs.
Right. So we've mentioned LA, that's clear, but what challenges are there for you in rock climbing? Are there projects that attract you, that you're working on, and that you can talk about?
There actually aren't that many specific ones. I guess my ultimate dream is simply that I'll just keep on climbing, and that I'll keep enjoying it. I don't think I'll ever have a problem with motivation, and as long as my health allows, I'll just keep giving my best. And it really depends on where that motivation takes me. Whether I keep pushing on 9C routes, focus more on bouldering for a while, or maybe feel drawn to bigger walls. I don't know yet. I think what I enjoy the most is just driving out on a weekend to some new area I've never been to before, climbing a few routes there, and that's something that will never stop being fun for me. I've got so many friends around me who've never lost that passion either, and simply the movement and being out in nature, that's just the best. I've always tried to be as versatile as possible, so there are still some climbing disciplines I'd like to explore more. Definitely things like trad climbing, single-pitch routes, and also spending more time climbing on Czech sandstone in the future. And yes, definitely, to see a big wall somewhere more remote. Like I'd definitely love to go to Greenland one day. But right now, with my family, I know that can wait. Maybe in 15 years or so.
That's not going anywhere.
For now, it would actually still be a problem for me to go on an expedition where I wouldn't get to climb much. Otherwise, my big challenge is really balancing everything with family life so that we're all happy. For example, we're even planning to live partly in Italy this winter, so I think it's going to be great there. Beautiful lifestyle, good training conditions, and plenty of rock and even some new lines to bolt. What excites me the most right now is finding my own projects, rather than just traveling the world and repeating existing routes. It's the whole process. Finding a line, bolting it, cleaning it. There's a certain sense of adventure in it. When you make a first ascent, it's like discovering blank spots on the map. There are holds that no one has ever touched before, and that's something that really draws me in.
What has climbing given you, and what does it still give you today?
A lot. It's such a complex question that it's hard for me to answer, because climbing has basically shaped me since I was a kid. I think it even shaped my character. I don't really know who I would be, what kind of person I would be if I hadn't climbed. When you spend so much time on the rocks from an early age, and most of your life you meet almost only climbers. Yeah, I think just being out at the crags shaped me way more than, I don't know, school ever did. Even though I've always seen climbing as important, I think what I like most about it is that it's such a clear-cut game. You either send the route or you don't. There's nothing in between. And that has taught me to be honest and fair with myself.
Adam, thank you for the interview, and best of luck to you.
Thanks a lot. It was nice.
Friends, thank you for watching this interview. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to share it. You can also subscribe to our channel on YouTube or Spotify so you won't miss any future interviews. Take care and see you at the next interview. Bye.